It was a Tuesday afternoon in the White House briefing room. No fireworks, no marching band. Just a microphone, a smirk, and 17 seconds of speech that quietly rewired the future of the larger sporting event humanity has ever attempted to stage. Most people scrolled past the clip. A few headlines flickered for a day. Then the cycle moved on the way it always does. But inside FIFA's headquarters in Zurich, the lights stayed on much later than usual that night. Because what Donald Trump said wasn't a threat, it wasn't a tariff, it wasn't even a policy, it was something far stranger, it was a redefinition. A single sentence that took the 2026 World Cup, already promised to billions as a global celebration of unity, and folded it neatly into the architecture of one man's political project. And that changes everything. For years, the 2026 World Cup was sold to us as a love letter, a continental embrace stretching from Toronto to Mexico City to Los Angeles. 3 nations, 16 host cities, one shared dream. Gianni Infantino called it the most inclusive tournament in history. The promotional materials showed children of every shade holding hands across painted borders. The narrative was simple. Football would heal what politics had broken. That was the surface story. The deeper story is one that almost no one is saying out loud yet. Because the moment a sitting U.S. president begins to speak about a sporting event the way Trump has started speaking about it, the event itself stops being a sporting event. It becomes something else entirely. It becomes a stage. And a stage is only ever as neutral as the person holding the spotlight. What Trump said, in essence, was that the World Cup would be used to showcase what he calls the strongest America in history, used to demonstrate border security, used to reward allies and signal disfavor toward those he considers adversaries. He spoke about deciding which cities deserved matches and which did not. He spoke about visa decisions being made personally. He spoke about the tournament as if it were already his. And FIFA said nothing. That silence is the loudest sound in this entire story. To understand why this matters, you have to understand the small, quiet mechanics of how a World Cup actually functions. It is not just stadiums and broadcasts. It is a delicate web of fan visas, broadcast agreements, sponsor activations, hotel logistics, and travel corridors. Every single one of those threads runs through the U.S. federal government in some form. Customs and Border Protection, the State Department, the FAA, Homeland Security. Each of them holds a thread, and every thread can be pulled. For most of FIFA's history, host governments have been silent partners. They build, they fund, they enforce, and they get out of the way. The football belongs to FIFA. The spectacle belongs to the fans. The politics in theory stay outside the stadium gates. That model is now dead. Because for the first time, a sitting U.S. president has openly suggested that fans from certain countries may not be welcome. Iran has already qualified. So have Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and several nations whose citizens fall under existing or expanded travel restrictions. Trump did not say their teams would be banned. He didn't have to. He said something far more clever. He said the United States would review each travel application on its merits, personally. Think about what that means for a moment. It means a Tunisian grandmother who saved for 8 years to watch her grandson play in New Jersey may not be allowed in. It means a Senegalese family who already booked their flights to Dallas may discover, 3 weeks before kickoff, that the embassy is no longer processing their paperwork. It means the World Cup is no longer guaranteed to be a tournament where the world is welcome. It is becoming a tournament where the world is auditioned. Then came the part nobody is talking about. Trump suggested casually, the way he suggests most things, that host cities which had been uncooperative with federal immigration enforcement should have their matches reconsidered. Los Angeles, Seattle, Boston, San Francisco. These are not small cities, these are anchor venues. Cities that have spent close to $1 billion in combined infrastructure preparing for matches. Cities that signed contracts with FIFA years ago. A president, in theory, does not have the authority to relocate a World Cup match. FIFA owns that decision. The contracts are ironclad. The schedules are locked. Anyone who has worked in international sports law will tell you this with absolute confidence. And yet, the contracts assume cooperation. The schedules assume open borders. The infrastructure assumes federal support for traffic control, airspace management, crowd security, and counterterrorism operations. None of those things are guaranteed. They are granted by the executive branch, by a single signature, by a single mood. And this is where the tournament truly became something else. Because for the first time, the host nation has a leader who has openly weaponized that mood. Not against an enemy, not in wartime, but against the very cities that will host the matches he claims to want to celebrate. Contracts cannot save you when the cooperation evaporates. The schedules cannot save you when the visas don't arrive. The stadiums cannot save you when the federal partners walk away from the table. And FIFA knows this. Sources inside the Federation, speaking quietly, the way they always do when stakes are this high, have begun to describe internal meetings that did not exist 6 months ago. Contingency planning, legal reviews, quiet conversations with the Canadian and Mexican federations about what happens if certain U.S. cities become operationally impossible. None of this is being announced. None of it ever will be. But it is happening, right now, in rooms most of us will never see. There is a number that captures all of this. One number. The kind of number that makes you stop scrolling. 48. 48 national teams will play in 2026. The largest field in World Cup history. Expanded specifically to make the tournament more global, more inclusive, more representative of football's actual geography. That was the promise. That was the architecture. But of those 48 teams, a growing list of their fan bases now face uncertain entry into the host nation. Iranian fans, Venezuelan fans, Cuban fans, fans from a dozen African nations on revised travel watch lists, fans from countries that have publicly disagreed with U.S. foreign policy, fans whose only crime is geography. A World Cup with 48 teams and empty seats for half of them is not a World Cup. It is a televised performance, and a televised performance is exactly what this is becoming. The football itself will still be incredible, it always is. Messi may play one final game, Mbappé will dazzle. A teenager nobody has heard of will score a goal that ends up on bedroom posters for the next 20 years. None of that changes. None of that can be taken away. But something quieter has already been taken. The hardest part of this story is not what Trump said. It is what his saying it has already done. Because once a head of state speaks about a tournament as a personal political asset, the tournament can never go back to being neutral. Even if every match is played exactly as planned, even if every fan eventually gets their visa, even if every host city cooperates beautifully and every ceremony goes off without an incident. The frame has shifted, the lens is bent. The story is no longer about football, it is about who got to come and who didn't and why. That frame will sit on top of every highlight reel, every goal, every trophy lift, every photo of a child in the stands wearing their nation's colors. The shadow of the decision will follow the celebration around the globe, the way a long evening shadow follows a runner who didn't realize the sun had moved. FIFA spent the last decade insisting that football and politics were separate, that the game existed in a space above the noise, that the rules of the pitch were the only rules that mattered. They sold this story to sponsors, to broadcasters, to 211 member federations, to the children watching from villages where there is barely electricity, but somehow always a screen showing a match. That story is now over, not because anyone formally ended it, but because one man in 17 seconds made it impossible to keep telling with a straight face. There is a deeper sadness here, one that has nothing to do with Trump specifically, and everything to do with what global spectacles have quietly become. The Olympics were supposed to transcend politics. They never really did. The World Cup was supposed to be the last great democratic gathering. It might not survive this decade as that. The Eurovision Song Contest, of all things, has spent the last 2 years engulfed in geopolitical fights nobody wanted. The pattern is the same every time. A global stage is built on the promise of unity. The unity holds for a generation, and then slowly at first, the people who control the stage realize how much power it actually contains. And they start using it, quietly, then openly, then shamelessly. We are now in the openly phase. What happens next is not knowable. Maybe Trump softens, maybe the visa system holds. Maybe the matches are played as scheduled, and the fears prove overblown. That is possible. History is full of warnings that did not become disasters, but the warnings themselves leave marks. They change how a generation thinks about an event. They change how a fan in Tehran teaches her son to dream about the World Cup. They change how a player from Senegal explains the tournament to his daughter. They change the meaning of the trophy, even if the trophy itself never changes shape. And these changes do not unwind. You cannot unsay the words a president said in a briefing room. You cannot unhear the silence with which FIFA responded. You cannot unfeel the moment when an event that belonged to everyone became, suddenly and quietly, the property of someone in particular. The World Cup will still happen. The football will still be glorious. The trophies will be lifted and the songs will be sung, and the cameras will pan across crowds that look, on the surface, exactly the way they were supposed to look. But underneath, the foundation has cracked. Not from an earthquake, from a sentence, 17 seconds long, spoken on a Tuesday afternoon when most of the world was not even listening. And in those 17 seconds, a tournament that was supposed to bring the world to America became a tournament that may instead show the world exactly what America has decided to become. So when the opening ceremony finally arrives, and the fireworks light up the sky above MetLife Stadium, and the announcers tell us this is the greatest celebration of football the planet has ever seen, ask yourself a quieter question. The one nobody on the broadcast will say out loud. Who exactly is this World Cup really for now?